Greetings. I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about Chapter 6, 7, and 8, mentioning a few items from those chapters from the Human Rights and Wrongs book by Dr. Helen Fine. She starts Chapter 6, States of Genocide, Genocide Massacres, and Ethnic Cleansing, with a discussion of terms focusing on the similarities and differences of genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes. Of course, you can have all three of those occurring at the same time, and she gives us the idea of referring to all that as mass atrocity crimes. She then talks about the United Nations Convention on Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide and other definitions of genocide. One of the big problems with the UN definition is that it excludes political affiliation, so other researchers use other definitions. In my own research, I include political affiliation. Also, she presents some information about accountability and the problem with low rates of prosecution and punishment of the perpetrators of genocides. And she also has a very informative section on the detection of genocide and the making and why do genocides occur. We see several preconditions related to the beginnings of genocide. For example, having a crisis blamed on the victims, having dictatorship leadership style, also having an exclusion of the victims from what is referred to as the universe of obligation, also having other bystanders and other states ignoring and failing to prevent a genocide from occurring. And she gives some example of Rwanda in 1994. And so we know what happened there, and also the examples we could look at would be Sudan, South Sudan, and Syria to bring it to more recent times. And also there's a very useful section on the prevention and punishment of genocide and ethnic cleansing toward the end of that chapter. Moving on to Chapter 7, No Brave World, Democracy and Human Rights. The big question here, is democracy the answer? It appears that most likely it is, and that there are a variety of structural variables that are related to a higher or lower risk for genocide or for life integrity violations. And so she has some research that she presents looking at countries during and after the Cold War, basically looking at 1987, 1997. Of course, we want to see a couple of updates here, but she looked at life integrity violations and some of the factors related to those. She found there wasn't much improvement over that 10-year span, and also that many of the violators were outside of Europe, and that having an unfree or partly free country was related to higher rates of life integrity violations, and so was having conflict, having high rates of poverty and high rates of ethnic inequality, and also tolerating life integrity violations. And of course, this is research that we need to replicate, and we need to continue on in this mode of thought. She also looked at some of the other underlying issues related to state violations related to religion type of government, and talked about toward the end that respect for life integrity leads to freedom rather than freedom leading to respect for life integrity, and provides a discussion of the effects also of terrorism on democracies. In Chapter 8, Human Rights, Freedom, and Development, looking at problems such as famine, patriarchy, infanticide, poverty, inequality, and discrimination, and health problems such as HIV/AIDS, and also respect for human rights. And she basically presents the idea that social cohesion leads to social capital and a greater respect for human rights. Again, this is correlational and not causal in that sense. And she states that social cohesion decreases life integrity violations as well as fear, and increases trust, reciprocity, and social capital. And I would agree with that up to a point. And this is where my own research moves in a different direction, not necessarily contrary to Dr. Fine's work. But what I found in my own research using what is used in basically family therapy called the Circumflex Model is when I looked at cohesion, it looked to me that when groups got together that became perpetrators, became extremely cohesive and kept out all these other groups, that was a risk factor for genocide. So let me go ahead and reframe that. Cohesion is a protective factor. Social cohesion is a protective factor. Too much social cohesion is a risk factor, in my opinion. So there's some different views on that and some ideas, but I found that when there was too much social cohesion, you had this group think, and you had these perpetrator groups that formed that were their own group, and then there were all the outsiders, the outgroups, and those that became victims. And so that's an interesting area to pursue, looking at the whole concept of social cohesion. And I borrow that from family therapy because the family therapist said that in families, if there's too much social cohesion, that can be a problem. If there's not enough social cohesion, that can also be a problem as well. And so I kind of have a different take on that, but I thought that was very interesting to look at. And certainly I think most would agree that building up social capital in societies is one way to decrease the risk of human rights violations. And this wraps up this video. Thank you.